Sometimes life offers you a summer that remains hidden, untouched by the passing years. A season that doesn't fade, even as time wears on, slipping like silk through your memory, always just out of reach. I wasn't looking for change. My life on the farm had settled into a steady rhythm, one that I thought would carry me through my days with quiet simplicity. The long hours spent tending the crops and caring for the animals filled my time well enough. After my husband passed, I didn't expect life to throw me many more surprises. But that summer, when my nephew Jack brought a friend to help with the season's work, I found myself experiencing a different kind of rhythm. A pull, a curiosity that I hadn't felt in years. There was something about Eli's presence, his easy laughter, his quiet strength that seemed to wake something in me. Something I thought had been long buried. Now, as I look back on those days, there's a peculiar ache to the memory, like the distant echo of a melody I can't quite hear. And perhaps as you listen, you'll understand why some secrets are best left in the quiet fields, in the warmth of a summer evening, where only the cicadas know the truth. The morning was still, the sky a soft shade of blue as the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon. I was in the garden, pulling weeds from around the vegetable beds, when I heard the crunch of gravel on the driveway. Wiping my hands on my old denim overalls, I looked up to see my nephew Jack stepping out of his dusty sedan, followed by another young man I didn't recognize. Jack had called a week ago, asking if he could bring a friend along to help out on the farm for the summer. He'd mentioned that Eli was hardworking, that he was saving up to pay for college, and that he could use the extra experience. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, seeing them both in person, I felt a strange mix of anticipation and uncertainty. Jack waved as he approached, a broad grin on his face. "Aunt Martha," he called, his voice full of youthful energy. "This is Eli. I figured I'd better introduce you to before we dive into work." I gave Eli a polite nod, my gaze meeting his. He was taller than Jack, with a quiet strength about him, his dark hair falling slightly over his brow and his hands tucked into the pockets of his jeans. He had a look of someone who had seen his share of life, despite his young age, and something in his calm demeanor set him apart from most young men I'd met. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Greer," he said, his voice warm and respectful. "Please, call me Martha," I replied, offering a small smile. "Jack tells me you're here to help out. I hope you're ready for some hard work." Eli's eyes held a hint of amusement as he nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I've done my fair share of it," Jack chimed in, giving his friend a friendly slap on the shoulder. "Eli's been working since he was a kid. He's tougher than he looks, you'll see." The two of them set to work that morning, tackling the old shed that had been leaning slightly for the better part of a year. I watched from the kitchen window as they hauled out the worn wood and cleared away the piles of forgotten tools and equipment. Eli moved with a quiet efficiency, his actions purposeful, his focus unwavering. I found myself lingering at the window longer than I intended, watching the way he moved, the way he approached each task with a certain ease. There was something about him that intrigued me, a quiet resilience, a steadiness that reminded me of my younger days on the farm, when every moment was filled with purpose and the satisfaction of hard work. I'd forgotten what that felt like, how alive a day could feel when you spent it with someone who truly understood the land. Later that day, as the sun began its slow descent, casting a warm golden glow over the fields, Jack had to leave to run some errands in town. That left Eli and me alone to finish up with the chicken coop, a project I'd been meaning to tackle for months. The old coop had needed new wire for ages, and with the chickens wandering further each day, it had become a necessity. "Would you mind giving me a hand with this?" I asked, feeling a strange nervousness creep in as I turned to him. Eli nodded, his face lighting up with a small smile. "Of course, Martha. Just tell me what to do." We worked in silence at first, the sound of the clucking chickens and the rustling grass filling the air around us. I showed him how to reinforce the wire, and he watched carefully, his hands moving deftly as he followed my instructions. There was a calm in his presence, a quiet focus that I found comforting. It had been so long since I'd worked alongside someone like this, someone who understood the unspoken language of the land. At one point as I reached for a nail, our hands brushed. It was a small, innocent touch, but it sent a spark through me, a feeling I hadn't expected. I glanced up, catching his eye, and for a moment we simply looked at each other, the air between us charged with something unspoken, something I couldn't quite name. Eli cleared his throat, breaking the moment as he returned to the task at hand. But I could see the faint color rising in his cheeks, a hint that he'd felt it too. I turned my attention back to the coop, my heart beating just a little faster as we continued our work in silence. As the day wore on and we finished the last of the repairs, I felt a sense of accomplishment, a quiet satisfaction that reminded me of my early days on the farm. I thanked Eli for his help, our eyes meeting once more in that quiet, unspoken way, and as he nodded in response, I felt a warmth spread through me, a feeling of connection, of being seen. That evening, as I sat alone by the fire, I found my thoughts drifting back to that moment, to the way our hands had brushed, to the quiet intensity in his gaze. I told myself it was nothing, just a passing moment, a simple flicker of connection between two people working together. But deep down, I knew there was something more to it, something that made me feel both exhilarated and apprehensive. The days passed in a quiet, steady rhythm, each one bringing with it a new task, a new project. Jack and Eli worked tirelessly, mending fences, clearing fields, tending to the animals. I spent most of my time overseeing their work, guiding them through the routines that had become second nature to me over the years. But I found myself spending more time with Eli than I'd expected, our shared moments becoming a constant presence in my day-to-day life. There was a gentleness to him, a patience that made even the simplest tasks feel meaningful. He listened carefully to my instructions, his gaze attentive, his responses thoughtful. And as we worked together, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't in years, sharing stories of my past, memories of my husband, the dreams I'd once held for this farm. Eli listened without judgment, his eyes soft as he absorbed each story, each fragment of my life that I offered. And in turn he began to share pieces of himself, stories of his childhood, his struggles, his dreams of becoming a veterinarian. He spoke of his love for animals, his desire to make a difference, and I felt a surge of pride, a sense of admiration for this young man who had entered my life so unexpectedly. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the fields, Eli and I sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. The air was filled with the scent of the earth, the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze, and a comfortable silence settled between us. "Thank you, Martha," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "for letting me be here, for trusting me." I looked over at him, my heart swelling with a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite name. "You don't need to thank me, Eli. You've been a help to me too, more than you know." He smiled, his gaze meeting mine in the dim light, and for a moment, I felt the weight of the years fall away, felt a warmth that I hadn't felt in a long time. There was a connection between us, a quiet bond that seemed to transcend age, to bridge the gap that separated our lives. Over the next few weeks, the routine on the farm settled into a comfortable rhythm. Jack, busy with his other commitments, often left Eli and me alone to handle the day-to-day tasks. Our shared hours in the fields, mending fences, or feeding the animals, became more than just work. They became the backdrop for conversations that seemed to flow as naturally as the stream by the pasture. Eli had a way of listening that made me feel heard in a way I hadn't in years. He asked thoughtful questions, not out of politeness, but because he genuinely wanted to know. Sometimes when the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the fields, I'd find myself telling him stories I hadn't shared with anyone since my husband passed. Stories of my childhood, my dreams for the farm, my hopes for the years ahead. Eli would listen quietly, his gaze steady, his expression warm. And though he was young, there was a maturity in his eyes, a kindness that seemed to understand the weight of my words. I found comfort in his presence, a quiet companion that brought a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. One evening, after a long day of work, I invited Eli to stay for dinner. Jack had gone out for the night, so it was just the two of us. We sat in the cozy warmth of the kitchen, the smell of roast chicken and fresh bread filling the air as we talked over our meal. The conversation flowed easily, moving from one topic to another, until inevitably it turned to the future. "So what's next for you, Eli?" I asked, watching as he set his fork down, a contemplative look crossing his face. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. I've been trying to save up to go to school. I want to study veterinary medicine, but it's been a tough road. Money's tight, and every time I get close, something comes up. There was a vulnerability in his voice, a raw honesty that tugged at my heart. I reached across the table, resting my hand on his. "I have no doubt you'll get there, Eli. You're determined, and you've got the heart for it. The animals, they trust you. I trust you." He looked up, his gaze meeting mine, and I felt a warmth in his eyes, a gratitude that was deeper than words. For a moment, the silence between us grew heavy, filled with something unspoken, something that neither of us dared to acknowledge. "Thank you, Martha," he said softly, his fingers brushing against mine. "That means more to me than you know." As our hands lingered together, I felt a quiet thrill, a sensation I hadn't felt in years. There was a gentleness in his touch, a warmth that seemed to flow from his hand to mine, and I found myself lost in the intensity of his gaze. For the first time, I felt seen, not as a widow or an older woman, but as someone who still had dreams, desires, and a life yet to be lived. We pulled our hands apart, each of us aware that we had crossed a line, even if only briefly. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the memory of his touch, the look in his eyes. It was foolish, I told myself, a passing moment of affection that meant nothing. But deep down, I knew it meant everything. The days continued much as they had, each one blending into the next with a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. Eli and I fell into a routine, our time together becoming the highlight of my days. I found myself looking forward to our shared tasks, our quiet conversations, the way he made me feel seen and valued in a way I hadn't in years. One warm afternoon, Jack was busy with a trip to the neighboring town, and Eli and I were left to handle the chores on our own. We worked side by side in the barn, tending to the animals, our conversation light and easy. But as the afternoon wore on, a quiet tension settled between us, a charged silence that neither of us dared to break. As we finished up, I felt a slight pang in my back, a reminder of the years I'd spent working the farm. I winced, reaching back to rub the sore spot, and Eli noticed, his expression filled with concern. "Are you all right, Martha?" he asked, stepping closer. "Oh, it's nothing," I replied, brushing it off with a wave of my hand. "Just an old back that's seen too many years of hard work." But before I could protest, Eli moved behind me, his hands gentle as he began to rub the sore spot. His touch was warm and steady, his hands moving in slow, comforting circles that eased the tension in my muscles. "There," he murmured, his voice soft. "Just relax, let me take care of it." I felt my breath catch, a quiet thrill running through me as his hands worked their way up my shoulders, his touch firm yet gentle. I closed my eyes, letting myself sink into the warmth of his touch, the closeness of his presence. For the first time in years, I felt truly cared for. As though I were more than just a caretaker, more than just the owner of this farm. When he finally stepped back, I turned to thank him, my words catching in my throat as I looked up at him. There was something in his gaze, a quiet intensity that mirrored the feelings I'd been trying so hard to ignore. Before I knew it, he had leaned in, his lips brushing mine in a kiss that was both tender and filled with a depth of feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time. For a moment, I forgot everything, the years between us, the consequences, the quiet life I'd built on this farm. All that mattered was the warmth of his touch, the closeness of his embrace. When we finally pulled apart, breathless and flushed, I felt a mixture of exhilaration and fear. We had crossed a line that couldn't be undone, and as I looked into his eyes, I knew that my life would never be the same. After that day, Eli and I became more careful, our moments together hidden from Jack's watchful eye. We met in the quiet corners of the farm, sharing stolen kisses and whispered words, creating a world of our own amidst the fields and pastures. There was a thrill in the secrecy, a sense of freedom in those hidden moments that made each encounter feel both forbidden and deeply cherished. We didn't speak of the future, didn't make promises we couldn't keep. Instead, we lived in the present, savoring each moment as it came, knowing that our time together was fragile, a fleeting gift. And yet, as the summer wore on, I felt a growing sense of unease. Jack was perceptive, and though he hadn't said anything, I sensed a change in his behavior, a subtle suspicion that lingered in his gaze whenever he looked at Eli and me. I knew that we couldn't keep our secret forever, that sooner or later the truth would come to light. As the days turned into weeks, I noticed Jack growing more distant, his interactions with both Eli and me tinged with a hint of wariness. He no longer joined us for meals as often, choosing instead to take his food to his room or disappear into town for hours at a time. There was a tension in the air, a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface, and I knew that our secret was on the verge of being uncovered. One evening, as Eli and I shared a quiet moment in the barn, Jack walked in unexpectedly. His eyes flicked between us, his expression darkening as he took in the closeness, the shared look that neither of us could hide. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice sharp with accusation. The words hung in the air, a challenge that neither of us could deny. I felt my heart pound, the weight of the truth pressing down on me as I struggled to find the words, to explain a connection that defied logic, that had grown in the quiet spaces of the farm, in the stolen moments that had become the heart of my days. "Jack," I began, my voice trembling, "it's not what you think." But he cut me off, his gaze filled with a mixture of anger and hurt. "I trusted you, Aunt Martha. And Eli, I thought you were my friend." The confrontation left a chasm between us, a rift that I knew could never be mended. Jack stormed out of the barn, leaving Eli and me standing in the quiet aftermath. Our secret now exposed, our world on the brink of collapse. The days following Jack's confrontation were filled with a silence that seemed to seep into every corner of the farm. He barely looked at me, his once easy smile replaced by a strained expression, his warmth replaced by a cold distance. It was as if, in one single moment, the years of trust and kinship we had built had shattered into pieces. Eli and I tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, but the tension between us was undeniable. The thrill of secrecy had vanished, replaced by a sense of foreboding that cast a shadow over our moments together. We were careful to avoid Jack's gaze, but the weight of his suspicion lingered, an unspoken accusation that hung in the air. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the farm was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, I found myself alone with Jack in the kitchen. He was sitting at the table, his shoulders tense, his eyes focused on a spot on the floor as if he couldn't bring himself to look at me. "Jack," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk." He looked up, his expression filled with hurt and anger. "I don't think there's anything to talk about, Aunt Martha. I saw enough in the barn. You and Eli, how could you?" The question cut through me, sharp and unyielding. I took a deep breath, searching for the words that would explain the unexplainable, that would somehow convey the complex web of emotions I had been caught in. "I never meant to hurt you, Jack," I said softly. "This wasn't something I planned. It just happened." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. "Happened? How does something like this just happen, Aunt Martha? He's my friend, and you're—" He stopped himself, his gaze hardening. "You're my family. You're the one person I thought I could trust." The accusation stung, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I wanted to reach out, to explain that my feelings for Eli weren't some fleeting whim, that they were real, as confusing and impossible as they were. But the words failed me, lost in the weight of his disappointment. In the end, Jack left the farm that night, his parting words hanging in the air like a final blow. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this." With Jack gone, the silence on the farm grew even heavier. I had thought that our secret coming to light would bring relief, that the weight of hiding would finally be lifted. But instead, I found myself haunted by guilt, by the knowledge that I had broken a bond that had once meant everything to me. Eli tried to comfort me, his presence a quiet reassurance, but I could see the strain in his eyes as well. He had lost a friend in Jack, and though he didn't say it, I knew he blamed himself. The once bright connection we had shared was now tinged with regret, with a sadness that made each moment feel bittersweet. One evening, as we sat on the porch in the fading light, Eli took my hand, his gaze filled with an intensity that both comforted and unsettled me. "Martha," he murmured, his voice soft but firm, "we can still make this work. We don't have to let anyone else's judgment define what we have." I looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, the hope that somehow, against all odds, we could find a way to make our love survive. But deep down, I knew that the rift between us and Jack, between us and the rest of the world, was too wide to bridge. "It's not that simple, Eli," I replied, my voice breaking. "There are things, responsibilities I have here, things I can't just leave behind." He nodded, a sadness settling over his features, but he didn't argue. Instead, he held me close. The warmth of his embrace a brief comfort in the midst of the storm that surrounded us. The rumors started slowly, whispered conversations at the local store, glances that lingered a little too long when I walked down the street. It wasn't long before the story of my relationship with Eli spread through the small town, each retelling more exaggerated than the last. One afternoon, I went into town for supplies, only to be met with cold stares and murmurs that followed me from aisle to aisle. Old friends turned away, avoiding my gaze, their expressions filled with a mixture of shock and disdain. I had lived in this town my entire life, built a reputation as a respectable woman, a devoted wife, and later a dedicated farmer. Now all of it seemed to vanish, replaced by the harsh judgment of a community that once welcomed me. When I returned to the farm, my hands shook as I unloaded the groceries, the weight of their disapproval pressing down on me like a heavy stone. Eli noticed, his brow furrowing as he came over to help. "What happened?" he asked, concern etched in his voice. "Everyone knows, Eli," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "The whole town, they know about us." He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I'm sorry, Martha. I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want you to be hurt because of me." I placed a hand on his shoulder, forcing him to meet my gaze. "This isn't your fault, Eli. I chose this too. I knew the risks, and I still wanted it. I still want it." He reached for my hand, his grip warm and steady. "Then let's leave," he said quietly, the determination in his voice unmistakable. "We don't need them, Martha. We can start over, somewhere new. Just the two of us." The idea was tempting, a whisper of escape that called to a part of me that longed for freedom. For a life where our love didn't have to hide in the shadows. But the thought of leaving the farm, the life I had built, the memories of my husband, my family, it was a decision I couldn't make lightly. "I don't know, Eli," I murmured, torn between the life I had known and the life I wanted. "This farm, it's all I have left." He nodded, his expression filled with understanding, but I could see the disappointment there, the hope that was slowly fading. We both knew that our time together was running out, that the weight of our love was too much for the life I had built to bear. As the weeks passed, the strain of our situation became too much to ignore. The tension with Jack, the judgment of the town, the quiet pain that lingered in Eli's eyes, it all began to wear on me, to chip away at the love that had once felt so strong, so unbreakable. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, I made the hardest decision of my life. I met with Eli by the barn, our secret haven now filled with memories that would forever haunt me. "I think it's time we let this go," I whispered, my voice breaking as I spoke the words that had been building inside me for weeks. "I love you, Eli, but I can't keep living like this. I can't keep hurting the people I care about." He looked at me, his expression a mixture of heartbreak and resignation. "I understand, Martha," he replied softly. "I don't want to cause you any more pain. I want you to be happy." We stood there in silence, each of us holding on to the last remnants of a love that had given us both so much, even as it had taken so much in return. And as we shared one final embrace, I felt a sense of peace, a quiet acceptance that, as painful as it was, this was the right choice. Eli left the farm the next day, his presence now a memory that lingered in the quiet corners of the fields, in the barn where we had shared our first kiss, in the spaces where our laughter once filled the air. And though my heart ached with the loss, I found solace in the knowledge that, for a brief moment, I had loved and been loved in a way I never thought possible. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild, to find peace in the life I had known before Eli, a life that was simpler, quieter, but no less meaningful. I reached out to Jack, slowly mending the bond that had been broken, finding comfort in the family I had left. And as the seasons changed, as the fields turned from green to gold, I held on to the memory of that summer, of the love that had come and gone, leaving me with a renewed sense of who I was and what I could be. In the end, I learned that love doesn't always fit neatly into the lives we've built. That sometimes it arrives unexpectedly, leaving us changed in ways we could never have imagined. And though my time with Eli was brief, it gave me a strength, a resilience that would carry me through the years to come. As I stood on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a quiet gratitude, a sense of peace that came from knowing that I had lived, that I had loved, and that, no matter where life took me, those memories would always remain. It started with a mistake. One of those mortifying, heat-rising mistakes that you wish you could undo the moment it happens. I didn't realize my stepson, Nick, was home when I decided to test the remote control feature on the new toy I had ordered. I'll admit it, I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to buy something like that. I'm 58 years old, for God's sake, not some giggling 20-something trying to spice things up. But loneliness has a way of creeping into the corners of your life, settling like dust you can't quite sweep away. My husband, Martin, is gone more often than he's home. Always off on business trips, always with an excuse about just one more deal or another big client to land. We haven't touched each other in months. Maybe even longer. I stopped keeping track when it became easier to ignore the silence than confront it. So, when I stumbled onto the website late one night, after a couple of glasses of wine, I clicked Add to Cart on something I never would have considered years ago. A sleek little toy with a remote control feature, a promise of some excitement I didn't have to ask anyone for. The box arrived a week later, discreetly packaged like they always promise. I remember opening it, feeling a mix of guilt and thrill bubbling in my chest. I hid it in the back of my closet, telling myself I'd try it out when I was alone, completely alone. That day came quicker than I expected. Martin was out of town for a conference, and Nick, my stepson, had been out most of the day, job hunting, he said. He'd moved back home 6 months ago after finishing his degree, trying to figure things out, as he put it. It's been nice having him here, truth be told. The house feels less empty, and he's polite, thoughtful. Good company, even if I sometimes catch myself looking at him a little too long. That afternoon, the house was silent, bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon sun. I decided to take the opportunity. My heart pounded as I unboxed the thing, placing it on the coffee table like it might jump out at me. I fiddled with the remote, turning it over in my hands, feeling ridiculous and nervous. "You're alone," I whispered to myself, laughing softly at my own hesitation. "Just try it." I sank back into the plush cushions of the living room couch, biting my lip as I hesitated again. Finally, I turned it on. A gentle buzz filled the air, soft, nearly imperceptible. I exhaled shakily, sinking further into the couch as the sensation hummed to life. It felt nice. Better than I expected. What I didn't know, what still makes my stomach drop when I think about it, was that Nick had come home. I heard it before I saw him. The faint shuffle of footsteps in the hallway. I froze, the toy still humming beneath me, my pulse spiking in terror. The remote was still in my hand, my fingers trembling. Before I could react, Nick stepped into view. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to see me like that. My cheeks flushed, my breath uneven, the damned remote sitting uselessly in my grip. Our eyes met, and everything stopped. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, frozen, his dark eyes flickering from the toy on the table to me. My face burned hotter than the summer sun pouring through the windows. I fumbled to turn it off, my hands clumsy, my entire body shaking. The buzzing stopped abruptly, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. I didn't look at him again. I couldn't. I grabbed the toy and bolted up the stairs, retreating to the safety of my bedroom like a teenager caught sneaking out. Once inside, I slammed the door and sank against it, pressing a hand to my chest as if that might calm the frantic pounding of my heart. "Oh my God," I whispered to myself, staring blankly at the floor. "Oh my God." The humiliation was unbearable. I'd always thought of myself as poised, composed. I'd been the one people turned to for advice, the one who kept it together, no matter what. And now my stepson had seen me like that. I stayed in my room for the rest of the day, refusing to come out. I barely ate. I didn't check my phone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the look on Nick's face. Shock, confusion, something else I couldn't quite place. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My mind kept replaying the moment over and over again like some cruel loop. But then, as the hours dragged on, the memory started to shift. I realized something. Nick hadn't looked disgusted. He hadn't stormed off or confronted me. There'd been something in his eyes, a flicker of curiosity maybe, or something even darker. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was projecting. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just my imagination. And that terrified me more than anything. The next morning, I woke up groggy, my head heavy from lack of sleep. I had spent half the night berating myself for what happened, and the other half replaying that moment in excruciating detail. I couldn't shake the memory of Nick's face, the way his brows had knit together, his lips slightly parted, his eyes. "Stop it, Diane." I pushed the thought away and forced myself out of bed. I told myself it was no big deal. He probably just thought I was acting strange, or he'd convinced himself he misinterpreted the whole thing. If I acted normal, if I pretended nothing happened, it would all blow over. That was the plan. Simple, right? But when I stepped into the kitchen that morning and saw Nick sitting at the table with a cup of coffee in his hands, I knew it wouldn't be so easy. He looked up when I entered, his eyes locking onto mine. For a moment, neither of us said anything. "Morning," I managed, my voice tight. I'd busied myself with the coffee pot, my back to him. "Morning," Nick replied, his voice low and even. I could feel his eyes on me. My cheeks burned, but I forced myself to stay calm. The coffee machine sputtered, filling the room with an awkward silence broken only by the drip of fresh brew. I poured myself a cup and turned to face him, acting as casual as I could. "Did you sleep well?" I asked, gripping the mug a little too tightly. Nick tilted his head slightly, his gaze unblinking. "Yeah, you?" The way he said it made my stomach flip. I felt like he was challenging me, poking at my composure just to see if I'd crack. I forced a tight smile and nodded. "Fine." He didn't say anything else. Instead, he sipped his coffee slowly, his eyes still lingering on me as if he were studying me. I couldn't take it. The tension in the air was unbearable, like some invisible string pulled taut between us, threatening to snap at any second. I muttered something about needing to get some work done, and practically fled from the kitchen, leaving my coffee half drunk on the counter. I spent the rest of the day hiding in my office, pretending to focus on work. My latest client, a retired couple redecorating their summer home, had sent over some inspiration photos for me to review. I tried to lose myself in fabric swatches and furniture catalogs, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't concentrate. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face again. The way his expression shifted when he realized what he'd walked in on. And worse, that look, the one I couldn't quite place. By the time the afternoon sun started to dip lower in the sky, I had given up any hope of getting work done. I leaned back in my chair, pinching the bridge of my nose as I let out a long sigh. What was wrong with me? I was acting like a schoolgirl with a crush, hiding, flustered, overthinking every little thing. He's my stepson, for God's sake. I had practically helped raise him since he was a teenager. Sure, I hadn't been much of a mother figure. He was already grown, independent, by the time Martin and I married. But still, there were lines that shouldn't be crossed. And yet, I hated the way my thoughts kept wandering, the way my body seemed to betray me every time I thought about him standing in that doorway. That evening, I was in the living room again, curled up on the couch with a book I wasn't actually reading. I kept hearing noises upstairs, Nick moving around in his room, the occasional creak of the floorboards. Every sound made me flinch. I was just about to call it a night and escape back to my room when I heard his footsteps coming down the stairs. My heart leapt into my throat. A second later, Nick appeared in the doorway. "Hey," he said casually, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jeans. "Hey," I replied, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. He walked into the room and sat down on the other end of the couch. Not too close, but close enough that I could feel his presence. The air shifted, the same tension from the kitchen lingering like a heavy fog. I tried to focus on the book in my lap, my eyes skimming over the words without absorbing them. "What are you reading?" Nick asked. I looked up, startled. "Oh, just something for work." He smirked and I swore there was a glint of amusement in his eyes. "You're holding it upside down." My cheeks flared red, and I quickly turned the book right side up. "It's been a long day," I muttered. Nick didn't say anything at first. He just watched me, his gaze steady and unreadable. "Are you okay?" he asked finally. The question caught me off guard. "What? You've been acting weird all day." I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. "I'm fine," I said quickly, too quickly. "Just tired. That's all." Nick leaned back against the couch, stretching his arms over the backrest. "If you say so." There was something in his voice, something teasing, almost playful, that made my stomach twist into knots. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye, taking in the way his shirt clung to his broad shoulders, the sharp line of his jaw as he tilted his head back. "Stop it, Diane." But I couldn't. He looked so different now, so grown up. Gone was the lanky teenager I had met years ago. In his place was a man, confident, self-assured, with a quiet intensity that I hadn't noticed before. Or maybe I just hadn't allowed myself to notice. "Anyway," Nick said, breaking the silence, "I'm gonna head out for a bit. Meeting up with some friends." I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "Okay. Have fun." He stood up, but before he left the room, he paused in the doorway. "You don't have to be embarrassed, you know?" My heart stopped. "What?" Nick turned to look at me, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "About yesterday. It's no big deal." I stared at him, my mind spinning, my cheeks blazing with heat. He didn't wait for me to respond. He just turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the silence of the living room, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. No big deal? But the way he'd looked at me, the way he'd said it, made it feel like the biggest deal in the world. The days that followed were unbearable. Every interaction with Nick felt like navigating a tightrope. I would catch him looking at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, and it sent a flush up my neck that I couldn't shake. My mind was betraying me, wandering into thoughts it had no business entertaining. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was projecting my own embarrassment onto him. He couldn't possibly know what I'd been feeling. But there was something about his gaze lately, the casual confidence in the way he spoke to me, the way he moved around the house, that made me uneasy in a way I hadn't felt before. It was on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when the tension shifted into something I couldn't ignore. I had been reorganizing the living room, an excuse to keep myself busy, when I heard Nick come in from the back door. He'd been out jogging, and I could hear him kicking off his sneakers in the hallway. I bent down to straighten a stack of magazines on the lower shelf of the coffee table when his voice startled me. "Hey." I jolted upright, nearly knocking my head against the table. Nick stood in the doorway, a faint sheen of sweat on his skin, his shirt clinging to his chest. He was holding a bottle of water, his lips curled into that familiar knowing smile. "Oh, Nick?" I stammered, brushing non-existent dust from my hands. "I didn't hear you come in. Didn't mean to sneak up on you." He took a long sip of water, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. My eyes lingered for a second too long before I forced them back to his face. "It's fine," I said, my voice coming out breathy. He leaned against the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest. "You've been avoiding me." The accusation, casual as it was, hit me like a slap. I looked away quickly, focusing on the stack of magazines again. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do." I glanced up, narrowing my eyes. "Nick, don't." "Don't what?" He smirked, his tone light, teasing, but there was a glint in his eyes that made my pulse quicken. "You've been acting strange ever since, well, you know." I froze, my cheeks burning. "There's nothing to talk about." "Isn't there?" He pushed off the doorway and walked into the room, closing the distance between us. My body tensed instinctively, every nerve on edge. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could smell the faint musk of his sweat, mixed with the sharp scent of his deodorant. "Nick, please." "You don't have to be embarrassed," he said softly, cutting me off. "It's normal, you know. You're human." I stared at him, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too heavy. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He tilted his head, studying me with that same unreadable expression that had been driving me insane. "That day, I didn't mean to embarrass you. I just didn't expect." He trailed off, letting the words hang in the air. "Nick, stop," I said quickly, my voice sharper than I intended. I took a step back, trying to put some space between us. We shouldn't be talking about this. It was a mistake. That's all. Was it? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He took another step closer, closing the gap I'd tried to create. My back hit the edge of the couch, and I had nowhere else to go. I looked up at him, my breath coming faster now. Nick? He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. The space between us crackled with something electric, something I couldn't deny anymore. You don't have to pretend, Diane, he said quietly. My name sounded strange coming from him, so intimate, so deliberate. I've seen the way you look at me. My stomach dropped. I don't. You do. His voice was soft, steady, but his words cut through my defenses like a knife. I swallowed hard, feeling the heat rise up my neck, my face burning with shame, and something else. I should have stopped it. I should have pushed him away, told him he was wrong, that this couldn't happen. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed frozen, trapped under the weight of his gaze. My body betrayed me, my breath hitching as his fingers brushed against my arm, barely a touch, but it was enough to send a shiver racing through me. You're beautiful, he said softly. The words hit me harder than I expected. Beautiful. When was the last time someone had said that to me? When was the last time someone had looked at me the way Nick was looking at me now? I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was feel. His hand slid up my arm slowly, deliberately, as if he were giving me time to pull away. I didn't. I don't know who moved first, him or me, but suddenly his lips were on mine, and the world tilted sideways. My mind screamed at me to stop, to pull back, to think about what I was doing. But my body had other plans. The kiss was tentative at first, almost testing, but when I didn't resist, it deepened. His hands found my waist, pulling me against him, and I let out a soft sound I didn't recognize as my own. It had been so long since I'd felt anything like this. The fire, the need, the uncontrollable rush of desire that made my knees weak and my head spin. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless, my heart racing as if I'd just run a marathon. Nick looked down at me, his eyes dark, his breathing ragged. Tell me to stop, he said quietly, his voice rough. I opened my mouth to say the words, but they wouldn't come. I knew I should stop him. I knew this was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. Instead, I just looked at him, my silence giving him all the answer he needed. His lips found mine again, hungrier this time, and I melted into him, letting the last of my resistance crumble to dust. The rest of that afternoon passed in a haze. I don't remember how we ended up in my bedroom, but I remember the way he made me feel. Alive, wanted, seen. It was reckless and selfish and completely undeniably wrong, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt like a woman again, not just a forgotten wife or a lonely housewife wasting away in an empty home. Afterward, as we lay tangled together in my sheets, reality began to creep back in. I stared up at the ceiling, my body still humming, my mind racing. What had I done? Nick propped himself up on his elbow, looking down at me with a small, satisfied smile. You okay? I turned my head to look at him, my chest tightening. We can't do this again, I said softly, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned down, brushing a kiss against my shoulder. We'll see, he murmured. I closed my eyes, my stomach twisting with guilt and anticipation. I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The days that followed were a blur of secrecy and stolen moments. I told myself, over and over, that it had been a mistake, a lapse in judgment, but those words meant nothing when Nick was near. It was as if a floodgate had been opened, and there was no way to close it again. Nick was careful, too careful. Around Martin, he was his usual self, polite, composed, almost distant. But when we were alone, everything changed. A touch that lingered too long. A look that burned through me. A whispered word that left me breathless. I was unraveling. It started with small things. Nick brushing past me in the hallway, his hand grazing my lower back, so quick I almost questioned if it happened at all. Nick sitting beside me on the couch at night when Martin had already gone to bed, our knees touching as we watched something, anything, on the TV, neither of us really paying attention. Every moment was charged. Every breath, every glance, every small movement was like gasoline poured onto a fire we both knew we couldn't control. And yet we let it burn. One night, Martin left for another one of his week-long business trips, and the tension in the house snapped. I had been in the kitchen preparing a cup of tea when I heard Nick come down the stairs. I didn't look up when he entered the room, but I could feel his presence, warm, magnetic, impossible to ignore. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," I murmured, focusing on the kettle as it hissed. "Martin's gone?" "Yes, he left this afternoon." There was a pause. I could hear him stepping closer, his socked feet moving softly across the tile floor. My pulse quickened, my hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the counter. "You're shaking," Nick said, his voice a low murmur near my ear. "I'm fine," I replied, though the words came out too breathy, too unsure. Nick's hands came to rest on my waist, his touch firm and deliberate. I closed my eyes, swallowing the lump in my throat as the heat of his body pressed against my back. "You don't have to pretend with me, Diane," he whispered. "Nick." I started, but my voice trailed off when he pressed a kiss against the side of my neck, soft and slow. I turned around to face him, my breath catching as our eyes met. There was no hesitation in his gaze, no doubt, no guilt, just hunger, mirrored in my own reflection. "You shouldn't be doing this," I said weakly, even as my hands found his chest. "Then tell me to stop." He waited. He gave me that chance, just like he had before, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't say them. Instead, I pulled him closer, my lips crashing against his. We spent the night together. In my bed. In the bed I shared with my husband. I should have felt guilty, and part of me did, but it was drowned out by the overwhelming sense of freedom. For the first time in years, I felt alive. The woman I had been, the lonely, invisible woman, was gone, replaced by someone who felt wild and reckless, someone who couldn't stop even if she wanted to. Nick stayed the entire night. I woke up just before dawn to find him still beside me, his arm draped lazily across my waist. I watched him sleep, my heart twisting with emotions I didn't have the words for. I brushed a hand through his hair, my touch gentle, careful not to wake him. "What am I doing?" I whispered to myself, the weight of reality pressing down on me like a stone. As if he could hear my thoughts, Nick stirred, his eyes opening slowly to find me staring at him. A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice deep and groggy. "Morning," I replied softly. He pulled me closer, burying his face in the crook of my neck. "You think too much," he said against my skin. I didn't respond. He was right. I did think too much. I thought about Martin, about what he would do if he ever found out. I thought about what people would say, how they would look at me. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who would never, never let this happen. But when Nick's lips found mine again, all those thoughts disappeared. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of secrecy and passion. We couldn't get enough of each other. In the mornings, after Martin left for work, Nick would find me in the kitchen, pressing me against the counter as the coffee brewed behind us. In the afternoons when the house was quiet, he would pull me into his room, our hands fumbling with clothes, our whispers desperate. At night, when Martin was asleep upstairs, Nick would slip into my room, and we would lose ourselves in each other until dawn. It was dangerous, reckless. But we couldn't stop, and I didn't want to stop. Then came the breaking point. It was a Friday evening. Martin had been home for a few days, and the house felt suffocating again. Nick and I had barely spoken, barely touched, and it was driving me insane. The distance between us was unbearable. Martin was sitting in his armchair, watching something on the news, oblivious to the storm brewing in the room. I sat on the couch across from him, pretending to flip through a magazine. Nick was on the other side of the room, slouched in a chair with his phone in his hands. I felt his eyes on me, even though I refused to look at him. At some point, Martin got up to grab a drink from the kitchen, leaving us alone. The moment he was out of the room, Nick stood up and walked over to me, stopping just behind the couch. "What are you doing?" I hissed under my breath, my heart pounding. He didn't respond. Instead, he leaned down, his lips brushing against my ear as he whispered, "Meet me in the garage, 10 minutes." Before I could react, he straightened up and walked out of the room, leaving me breathless and shaking. I knew it was stupid. I knew it was risky. But when Martin finally went upstairs to shower, I found myself slipping out the back door and into the garage. Nick was already there, leaning against the workbench, waiting for me. The moment I stepped inside, he pulled me to him, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that stole the air from my lungs. "You're gonna get us caught," I whispered desperately, even as my arms wrapped around his neck. "Do you want me to stop?" "No," I admitted. He kissed me again, deeper this time, and I let myself melt into him. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew it couldn't last. I knew this was going to blow up in our faces eventually. But in that moment, I didn't care. I would deal with the consequences later. For now, I just wanted to feel alive. After that night in the garage, the walls of restraint we had been tiptoeing around crumbled completely. There was no going back. Nick and I couldn't keep our hands off each other. Every corner of the house became a dangerous playground for our desires. A stolen kiss in the laundry room, hands roaming under clothes while the dryer hummed softly in the background. A quick, fevered encounter in the guest bathroom while Martin sat in the living room, completely unaware. The thrill of getting caught only seemed to make it harder to stop. We were reckless, addicted, and we knew it. I remember one afternoon when Martin had left for a last-minute meeting downtown. I was in the backyard, lounging on one of the sun chairs, pretending to read a book. The sun was hot, burning my skin in the best way, and for a moment I allowed myself to relax. Then I heard the sliding door open behind me. "Hey." Nick's voice broke the silence, smooth and easy. I turned my head slightly to look at him. He was shirtless, wearing nothing but a pair of low-hanging gym shorts. His skin was sun-kissed, his muscles taut from the hours he spent at the gym. My mouth went dry. "Shouldn't you be out?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Didn't feel like it. Nick walked over and sat on the edge of the chair next to me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his skin. He leaned back slightly, propping himself up on his arms as he looked at me. "You've been avoiding me again," he said. I glanced at him over the top of my sunglasses. "I haven't." "You have," he insisted, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "You're not very good at hiding it." I sighed, closing the book and setting it down on the small table beside me. "Nick, it's dangerous." "We've already crossed the line," he said simply. "What's the point in pretending otherwise?" His words hit me harder than they should have. He was right, of course. There was no undoing what had already been done, no erasing the way we had become entangled in one another. But still, I tried to keep my grip on what little reality I had left. "Your father could find out," I said quietly. "He won't," Nick replied, his voice steady. I looked at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt, but there was none. He was so confident, so sure of himself and of us. I hated how much I wanted to believe him. "We have to be careful," I murmured. "We are careful," he said. I shook my head. "Not careful enough." Nick leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "Then maybe we should stop. Is that what you want?" He was challenging me again, and we both knew it. I opened my mouth to respond, to say yes, to end this before it spiraled even further out of control. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I grabbed the front of his shorts and pulled him closer. That afternoon, we ended up in my bedroom again, our bodies tangled together beneath the sheets. The sunlight poured through the curtains, painting golden streaks across his bare skin as he lay beside me, his breathing slow and steady. I watched him for a long time, my chest tight with emotions I couldn't untangle. Desire, guilt, longing, and something even deeper that terrified me. "Nick," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. He opened his eyes, turning his head to look at me. "Yeah?" I hesitated, the words caught in my throat. I wanted to tell him this had to stop, that we couldn't keep doing this, that it would destroy us both. But when I looked into his eyes, I couldn't say any of it. Instead, I whispered, "Nothing." He reached for me, pulling me against him, and I let myself melt into his embrace. As the weeks passed, it became harder and harder to pretend nothing was happening. Every time Martin spoke to Nick at the dinner table or asked me how my day was, I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of my own lies. One evening, while Martin was in the backyard grilling steaks, I caught Nick watching me from across the kitchen. He was leaning against the counter, his arms crossed over his chest, a lazy smile tugging at his lips. "What?" I whispered, glancing nervously toward the sliding door to make sure Martin wasn't watching. "You're beautiful when you're nervous," Nick replied, his voice low and teasing. "Stop," I hissed, though my cheeks flushed with warmth. He didn't stop. Instead, he pushed off the counter and walked over to me, stopping so close that I could feel his breath on my neck. My heart pounded as he reached up, brushing a stray hair behind my ear. "Nick," I warned, glancing toward the backyard again. He ignored me, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw as he leaned down, his lips grazing my ear. "You should tell him," he whispered. My stomach dropped. I pulled back to look at him, my eyes wide. "Tell him what?" He shrugged, smirking. "About us. Are you insane?" I whispered harshly. Nick laughed softly, but there was something in his eyes, a glint of danger, that sent a chill racing down my spine. "Relax. I'm just teasing." He kissed the corner of my mouth, lingering for just a second before stepping back. My chest tightened as I watched him leave the kitchen, his movements calm and unbothered, as if he hadn't just set my entire world spinning. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling as Martin snored softly beside me. Nick's words echoed in my mind over and over again. "You should tell him." It was a joke, I told myself. Just Nick being Nick, pushing my buttons like he always did. But it unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. We were playing a dangerous game. One wrong move, one slip-up, and it would all come crashing down. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket up to my chin as I tried to quiet my thoughts. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before something went wrong. The first crack appeared the following weekend. Martin had gone out for the afternoon, leaving Nick and me alone in the house. I was in the shower, the hot water cascading over my shoulders, when I heard the bathroom door open. My heart leapt into my throat. "Nick," I said, my voice sharp, but he didn't respond. A second later, the shower door slid open, and there he was, standing there with that same lazy, confident smirk. "Are you insane?" I hissed, my voice hushed. "Martin could come home any minute." "He won't," Nick replied simply, stepping into the shower with me. I should have pushed him away. I should have screamed at him to leave. But instead, I let him pull me against him, the water streaming over us as his lips claimed mine. It was the riskiest thing we'd done yet. And when it was over, and I was left breathless against the tile wall, I realized something that terrified me. I didn't want to stop. No matter how dangerous it was, no matter how many times I told myself it had to end, I couldn't let him go. For weeks, the house had been our dangerous sanctuary. Every stolen moment, every lingering glance, every touch had kept the fire alive, feeding something I couldn't control. But deep down, I knew we couldn't live in this bubble forever. Reality was bound to catch up to us, and it did. Harder than I ever expected. It started on a Thursday afternoon, a day like any other. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner while Martin worked upstairs in his home office. Nick had just come back from the gym, and as usual, he walked in without a care, shirt slung over his shoulder, a bottle of water in hand. "Hungry?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I chopped vegetables. He leaned against the counter, his expression unreadable. "Starving." There was something in his tone, something in the way he looked at me that put me on edge. I kept my eyes on the cutting board, my pulse quickening. Martin was right upstairs, just a few steps away. "You need to stop looking at me like that," I murmured under my breath. "Like what?" I glared at him, lowering my voice. "Like that. You know exactly what I mean." Nick smirked, his gaze lingering on me for a moment too long before he finally shrugged and moved to the fridge. He pulled out a soda and cracked it open, the sound far too loud in the quiet kitchen. "What's with you today?" I asked, trying to steer the conversation onto safer ground. Nick looked at me over the rim of the can, his expression suddenly serious. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. I could feel it. Something was off. That night, Martin sat at the dining table with us, oblivious to the tension simmering just beneath the surface. He was talking about work, something about a deal he was trying to close, but I couldn't focus. I kept sneaking glances at Nick across the table, trying to read him, trying to figure out what was wrong. Finally, Martin's phone rang, and he excused himself to take the call in his office. The moment he was gone, the silence in the dining room grew deafening. "What's going on with you?" I whispered, my voice sharp. Nick pushed his plate away, leaning back in his chair as he looked at me. His calm, confident demeanor was gone, replaced by something darker. "I ran into someone today," he said quietly. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Someone who knows." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Knows what?" Nick didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, his expression hard. "About us." The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady myself. Who knows? He hesitated, as if debating whether or not to tell me. A guy I know from school, Adam. He said he saw us last week in the garage. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The garage. I thought we'd been careful, but apparently we hadn't been careful enough. What did he say? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Nick shrugged, though I could see the tension in his jaw. He didn't say much, just that he saw us and that he'd keep quiet, for now. For now? I echoed, my stomach twisting into knots. Nick looked me dead in the eye. He wants money. $5,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. What? He said if we don't pay, he'll tell Martin. I stared at him, my mind racing. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This was my worst nightmare come to life. If Martin found out, if anyone found out, it would ruin everything. My marriage, my reputation, my life. Nick must have seen the panic on my face because he reached across the table, grabbing my hand. I'll take care of it, he said firmly. You don't have to worry about anything. But I did worry. I worried more than I ever had in my life. The next few days were unbearable. I could barely eat. I could barely sleep. Every time Martin spoke to me, every time he kissed my cheek or asked how my day was, I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of my guilt and fear. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. For Adam to show up at our front door. For Martin to confront me. For everything to come crashing down. Nick tried to reassure me, but even he seemed on edge. I caught him pacing in the backyard one afternoon, his phone in his hand, his expression dark and tense. Did you talk to him? I asked, my voice shaking. Nick looked up at me, his jaw tight. Yeah, he's not backing down. What are we gonna do? I'll handle it, Nick said again, but this time his voice was harder, colder. How? I pressed, panic creeping into my voice. We don't have $5,000 just lying around, and even if we did... I said I'll handle it, Nick snapped, cutting me off. I stared at him, stunned by the anger in his voice. He ran a hand through his hair, letting out a long breath as he looked away. I'm sorry, he muttered. I didn't mean to yell. I don't know what to do yet, but I'll figure it out. For the first time since this all began, I realized just how far we'd fallen. How deep we were in over our heads. This wasn't a game anymore. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling as Martin slept beside me. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, the silence deafening. I thought about Nick. About what we'd done, about the mess we were in now. I had let this happen. I had let myself fall into something I couldn't control. And now it was spiraling out of control. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know if it could be fixed. All I knew was that things were about to get much, much worse. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every sound, every creak of the house sent me into a spiral of panic, convinced that Adam was outside, or worse, that Martin was on to us. I kept imagining him finding out everything, watching his face twist with betrayal. By morning, I felt like a ghost. I stumbled out of bed, the weight of guilt and fear dragging me down with every step. I found Nick in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, staring at his phone with a deep frown. Did you hear from him? I asked softly. Nick looked up at me, his face tense and tired. He's getting impatient. My stomach nodded. What does that mean? He texted me this morning. Nick turned the phone around so I could see the screen. The message from Adam was short, blunt. Tell her to get the money today. Or I'll go to her husband tonight. I'm serious. I felt sick. I gripped the back of one of the chairs to steady myself, my vision swimming. What are we going to do? Nick's jaw tightened. I'll deal with him. There was something about the way he said it, so calm, so cold, that made me pause. I looked at him, my heart pounding. Nick, what do you mean, deal with him? He didn't answer. By late afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. Nick had left the house hours earlier, and I hadn't heard from him since. I paced the living room, chewing my nails, jumping every time my phone buzzed with a notification. When the front door finally opened, I spun around, my heart lurching in my chest. Nick stepped inside, his expression unreadable, his clothes slightly rumpled. Where have you been? I demanded, my voice trembling. Nick set his keys down on the table, avoiding my gaze. It's done. What's done? I talked to him, Nick said flatly. He's not gonna bother us anymore. Something about the way he said it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. What did you do? Nick looked at me then, his eyes dark and steady. I handled it. You're not answering me, I said, my voice rising with panic. What did you do? Nick sighed, running a hand through his hair. He's not going to tell Martin. He's not going to tell anyone. Just trust me. Trust him? How could I trust him when he wouldn't tell me what he'd done? That night, I could barely function. I moved through the house in a daze, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Nick was calm, too calm, as if none of this had ever happened. Meanwhile, I felt like I was drowning. After Martin went to bed, I cornered Nick in the hallway. You need to tell me what's going on, I hissed. He stared at me for a long moment before finally speaking. Adam's gone, he left town. Just like that? I demanded, incredulous. Nick shrugged. He got scared. He realized he was messing with the wrong people. I didn't believe him. Not for a second. But I didn't push it further. I couldn't. The thought of what Nick might have done, the lengths he might have gone to for me, was too much to bear. For a while, things went back to normal. Or as close to normal as they could get. Nick and I pulled away from each other, as if some unspoken agreement had been made. The bubble we'd been living in had burst, and neither of us knew how to put the pieces back together. Martin didn't suspect a thing. He went about his days as usual, blissfully unaware of the chaos that had unfolded around him. But I couldn't relax. I couldn't stop thinking about Adam, about what Nick had done to make him go away. Then the letter arrived. It was a Tuesday morning when I found it in the mailbox, an unmarked envelope with my name scrawled across the front in messy handwriting. My hands shook as I carried it inside, my mind racing. I tore it open, my breath catching as I unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. You think it's over? It's not. I know everything. You'll hear from me soon. I sank into the chair at the kitchen table, the note trembling in my hands. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I thought this nightmare was over. But it wasn't. Someone else knew. Someone else was watching. And they weren't going to let us get away with it. I didn't tell Nick about the letter right away. I didn't know how. He had already gone so far to protect me, to protect us, and I couldn't ask him to do more. Instead, I hid the letter in the back of my desk drawer and tried to pretend it didn't exist. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Every time I left the house, I felt eyes on me. A car parked down the street that I didn't recognize, a figure in the corner of my vision that disappeared when I turned to look. It was paranoia, I told myself, just my mind playing tricks on me. Until it wasn't. It happened one night when I was alone in the house. Martin was out of town again, and Nick had gone to visit friends. I was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine when I heard it, a faint thud from somewhere upstairs. I froze, my blood running cold. Nick? I called out, even though I knew he wasn't home. Silence. My heart pounded as I set down my glass and stood up, every muscle in my body on edge. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a heavy candlestick, and started up the stairs, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the moon through the windows. I crept toward the bedroom, my hands trembling. Then I saw it. The window in Martin's office was open, the curtain fluttering softly in the breeze. And on the desk was another letter, identical to the first. I dropped the candlestick, my hands shaking as I grabbed the note. You're not as careful as you think. I'm coming for you. A sound behind me made me whip around, my heart lurching into my throat. Nick was standing in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes locked on mine. What's wrong? I held up the letter, my voice breaking. Someone knows. Someone's been here. Nick's expression hardened as he stepped into the room, taking the note from my hands. He read it quickly, his jaw tightening. We need to leave, he said quietly. What? I whispered, my pulse racing. We can't stay here, Nick said, his voice calm but firm. It's not safe anymore. I stared at him, my mind spinning. Leave? Leave everything behind? My house, my marriage, my entire life? But as I looked at Nick, I realized I didn't have a choice. We had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and now we were running out of time.